when you put this much attention and effort into the journey, something has to give. Other parts of you are placed on the back burner, or you feel like you can no longer invest in parts of you that were so natural and routine in the past. You may feel a sense of loss, a sense of joy being taken away, or a sense of who you are being hijacked. And to me, that feels really spiritual in terms of your connection to yourself as a divine being, your connection to your heart and your womb, and even to yourself as a woman is transformed. Welcome to the Red Thread, Fertility, Healing, and the Embodied Journey. I'm your host, Shreyasi Brodhecker. This podcast was created for women who are walking a medically assisted fertility journey, such as IVF or IUI, and feeling like there has to be more than just getting through it. More support, more understanding, and a deeper way of staying connected to yourself along the way. Here we explore the emotional, physical, and spiritual layers of this experience through honest conversation, shared stories, and insights to help you feel held on an isolating path. Wherever you find yourself right now, whether things feel uncertain, overwhelming, or heavy, you don't have to carry it on your own. This is the Red Thread, a space where you can slow down, feel what's here, and gently find your way back to yourself. Welcome to the Red Thread podcast, Fertility, Healing, and the Embodied Journey. And today's episode is the 5 things I wish people knew about an IVF IUI journey. This is a list of 5 things for women or couples on the journey to reflect on. Maybe you can resonate with some of the things I share today, or you're fairly early in your journey and you're still figuring these things out as you go. And I really hope that this episode can be a bit of a foundation or an anchor for you on your path. It's also an episode for loved ones, supporters, allies of women or couples on this path who want to learn more about these perspectives. And of course, I'm sure other fertility professionals and those in this field can recognize a lot of what is being shared today. These are themes I hear over and over again in fertility support spaces when people are sharing their stories. And I can relate to most of the items on this list because these are things I've experienced as well. And it feels important to share and generate discussion, and just to have the opportunity to listen to this episode and then maybe sit down with a friend, have a coffee, chat about it. That would be so uplifting. I also envision that if you're feeling isolated or alone on your IVF IUI path, that you can listen to this episode and start to feel like someone gets it, that you're not crazy, you're not alone, and you are deeply held and witnessed in your experience. I always remind listeners or anyone in spaces with me that you practice your discernment. You are the wise woman of your body and your path. And so there may be things I share today that resonate for you. Maybe you've experienced that yourself. And there may be things I share that really don't connect. And that's okay. I invite you to take what you feel you need from today's episode and leave the rest. So the first thing that I wish people knew on an IVF IUI journey is that contrary to first appearances, this is not just a medical experience or journey. What do I mean by that? So, of course, when we think of IUI or IVF, it is a medical procedure. It's a fertility treatment. It's a treatment built on technology and expertise and knowledge of the female reproductive system, her fertility and her physiology through the lens of medicine. When you talk to a professional about your options, you are speaking with a physician, you might be speaking with nurses and nurse practitioners and other health professionals inside of a clinic space. Certainly there is that medical component, and that is a vast overlay to what IVF and IUI are about. You will be inundated with more facts and probabilities and statistics and information than you ever knew about your eggs, your lab work, your particular uterine environment, and how to optimize fertility depending on the professional you're working with. You'll learn about different tests and procedures, even something as simple as a vaginal ultrasound will be an experience you'll have sometimes several times if they are monitoring you during a treatment cycle. You'll get to understand various procedures, what different numbers mean, and of course you'll also experience diagnoses you never thought about along the way. An example might be a diagnosis of endometriosis, understanding fibroids, understanding other aspects of your pelvic physiology and health that might need to be addressed prior to IVF or IUI or even between treatment cycles. There's no denying there is an incredible learning curve, which is often quite steep for women and couples going through IVF or IUI. There's the aspects around genetic counseling. If you are exploring donor conception, there's information there. If you are exploring embryo adoption or surrogacy, there's a vast body of information there that you absorb. So as I'm sharing all this, you get the sense that that's a lot of information. Mentally, there is a huge toll when you go on an IVF or IUI journey, when you embark on this path. You're processing information that others who've conceived without medical fertility treatments may not have considered. You're considering aspects that maybe they couldn't consider, such as your genetic makeup, the genetic makeup of your partner or donor, how those things can work together. You're exploring parts of your cycle that go beyond ovulation that maybe women who are wanting to conceive in other ways don't have to look at or examine on such an intricate level. There's a depth and a scrutiny of your body in fertility clinics that somebody who isn't conceiving with those treatments doesn't have to experience. So I believe there is a cognitive toll on people on this journey. There are multiple decision points, and it really feels every time that it's a relatively high stakes decision. So you're making these decisions under a sense of pressure, under a sense of lack of certainty. You can maybe know the potential outcomes of each decision you make, but you will never know what the outcome actually is. And when you're wanting to become a parent and hold a child in your arms, there's an emotional stakes as well to these decision-making processes. And so I think that it's important to remember that besides the medical overlay, there's a mental impact to being on this journey, mental or cognitive. Of course, there's an emotional and nervous system aspect to being on this journey as well. Women are unique in their nervous systems, in their physiology. And this is something I'll go into in more depth in another episode. But an example of this is that our parasympathetic nervous systems, which are the rest and digest aspect of our nervous systems, have innervations and nerve pathways that are linked into our womb or our uterus. So an example is the primary nerve within the parasympathetic nervous system. The vagus or vagal nerve has its final innervation point inside of the cervix in a womb, in a healthy woman. And so we don't necessarily hear about this element, but there are drastic nervous system impacts to a woman who is receiving or preparing for IVF and IUI. If we think about it, there are procedures that we have manipulation of our cervix as we undergo. So an example could be something as simple as a pap smear. I think for women, any woman listening to this, a pap smear is not just a pap smear. Using a speculum or having a speculum used on you, having swabs in your cervix, there's a sensitivity, there's an aliveness, there's a nervous system component that comes online. And we know that, anyone who's had a pap smear. And so take that now to another level where you're having ultrasounds, you're having mock transfers, you're having your cervix immobilized or repositioned, you're having medications inserted vaginally that can have an impact on your vaginal tissues and your cervix. Those are all aspects that will impact your nervous system. The other piece of being on a journey like this is you're going through constant cycles of hope and excitement, apprehension, anxiety, and potentially disappointment and loss. And then having to somehow integrate this loss and disappointment, and depending on who you are or your particular path, finding ways to do this and then immediately moving into the next cycle, which is a treatment cycle. So it's an incredible amount of pressure on a nervous system. We often brace. We often prepare for the worst. If the worst has happened to us, quote unquote, on a cycle and we haven't been successful, we'll remember that either consciously or unconsciously as we move into the next cycle. And so these are ways that our nervous system can also be impacted by being on an IVF IUI journey. And of course, the hormones that you're exposed to can have incredible effects, adverse effects, or substantial effects on your mood, on your alertness, on your cognitive abilities, on your stress, on your sleep quality, and the list goes on and on and on. Related to that nervous system element is that we also have an emotional element to this journey. There are, like I said, highs and lows. Being on this journey will bring you into close contact with grief. Maybe not for every woman, but for a lot of women and couples, there are different layers of grief that are experienced either early in this journey or after ongoing attempts and cycles that haven't gotten you where you want to be. There may be pregnancy losses, biochemical pregnancies, and other complications that also affect you emotionally. And then, of course, there's that ache or yearning to become a mother through all of it. I will share in more depth about the emotional experience of an IVF IUI journey on another podcast, but it felt important to bring that here. And besides the physical or medical, the nervous system, emotional, mental, and cognitive effects of being on an IVF or IUI journey, an IVF and IUI journey also impact you spiritually. There are shifts, major shifts in a person's identity, how we see ourselves, how we see our life, and what we hope to accomplish in terms of our dreams or our life stages that is continually challenged on an IVF journey. When you're on a medicalized fertility journey, you really start to look at the years that have gone by, your role as a mother or not as a mother, and how that affects who you are as a woman and as a person. When you put this much attention and effort into the journey, something has to give. Other parts of you are placed on the back burner, or you feel like you can no longer invest in parts of you that were so natural and routine in the past. You may feel a sense of loss, a sense of joy being taken away, or a sense of who you are being hijacked. And to me, that feels really spiritual in terms of your connection to yourself as a divine being, your connection to your heart and your womb, and even to yourself as a woman is transformed. And often these changes or impacts don't end once you're pregnant. They continue through your pregnancy and as you're raising children. You may find trust, faith, your relationship to God or a higher power all being impacted on this journey. And I think it's important for us to speak about. So that is the first thing I wish people knew on the IVF IUI journey, is that it doesn't just affect you medically, it affects you cognitively or mentally, it affects your nervous system and emotional landscape, and it affects you spiritually. Let's take a pause from the episode for a moment, as I'd love to share a few resources with you. If you're moving through your medically assisted fertility journey and feeling overwhelmed or disconnected, I've created a library of guided meditations and somatic practices to help you feel more grounded, regulated, and supported in your body. This is the Red Thread Library. If this feels supportive for you, you can explore more about the Red Thread Library at my website, www.shreysibrodecker.com. And now let's come back to the conversation. The next thing that I wish people knew about an IVF or IUI journey is to release timelines. It seems like all we're doing is hurrying up and waiting on this journey. You might have a beautiful timeline of knowing your cycles intricately, especially if you're a woman with regular cycles, regular points of your cycle where you ovulate, where you bleed. You might have a beautiful bleed of a certain length of days or duration, and everything can feel like clockwork. You might go into a clinic, hear about different treatment options, think you're going to try IUI or IVF. Maybe you have a certain idea of where your sperm is coming from, a known sperm donor, potentially a partner, or you might be looking at a donor, sperm donor from a donor bank. This might be how you start out. It might not. And then things change. Maybe you decide after using your partner's sperm and your eggs for a few cycles and it not coming out the way you hoped in terms of a pregnancy, or if you're a single mom by choice, using donor sperm and hoping for a successful outcome after a few cycles. And then if it doesn't pan out that way, you pivot. You may take a break. You may pause just to feel the emotional impact of what you're dealing with. You may decide to find another donor, or you might decide to take a break altogether and then come back. It's so interesting to me because we receive this messaging that a lot of women live by, in that every cycle counts when you're on an IVF IUI journey. Every cycle is an egg you release. And it feels like a lot of pressure, but the reality is a lot of women ascribe to this philosophy because we want to do everything right. We want to do the best we can. And that may come from years of being successful in other things you've done and using those coping styles and those approaches with fertility. And it doesn't always work. So occasionally you may have pauses that are internally generated or chosen, and other times they may be externally imposed. For example, having a scan or an imaging and finding out you have fibroids or you have endometriosis, and you may have never felt symptoms, but this is now something that will delay you in having your IVF or IUI cycle. You need to have it addressed surgically or in other ways prior to your cycle. So there are going to be a lot of times that this timeline you have in your head shifts. And I often will tell women, and I've felt it myself, the only way we can get through that is to feel what we feel and somehow adapt, release our attachment to a certain timeline, and understand that occasionally our timelines flow beautifully and at other times they don't. It gets sticky and there's pauses and there's a hiatus. And is there a way to be okay with that? Is there a way to find acceptance, especially if it's not in your control? Maybe this is an opportunity to practice radical acceptance, which I will speak about in another episode. So that's the second thing I wish people knew is there's a lot of waiting involved. If you're someone who is successful in the first or second cycle, that is amazing, and I celebrate that. And if you are a woman or couple going through this medicalized assisted fertility journey and have had several cycles over several years, I see you too. And so that's important to know is that you're not doing anything wrong. You're not doing anything to slow your journey down, but our expectations that things are going to flow at a certain pace and rhythm they don't always pan out. And so we have to come to a place where we can make peace with that and then move forward with the next steps if you are still attached to your dream of becoming a mother or parent. The third thing I wish people knew on an IVF IUI journey is that it isn't cheap or easy. We always hear these stories from family or coworkers, or we know people who've gone through this path and have had wonderful outcomes. It's been an easeful or relatively easeful path. I will say I don't think any woman's IVF or IUI path is easeful, but there are some paths that may be less complicated than others. And I think what people don't always realize is there's a financial element to this. And that can also be something to think about on this journey. How can you create the provisions or the financial resources to make your dream happen? Are there ways you can generate these provisions? Are there people you can rely on? Is there support you can access? Is your province one where there are benefits? Depending on where you're listening in the world, what kind of financial support do you have where you live for IVF or IUI? And do you need to take breaks between cycles simply to help to regenerate that financial means or stability between your treatments? And that is something I think some people already know, but you'll never quite know. It's staggering when you first see the numbers and the prices and the rates of some of these procedures and treatments. And it can take a minute or a few minutes to sit with those numbers and look at your life plans and look at your capacity and resources and know how that will impact the way you do your IVF or IUI journey. The fourth thing that I wish people knew on this journey is that you can do everything right. You can follow recommendations. You can optimize your nutrition. You can nurture and tend to your body, including your beautiful womb. You can exercise. You can nourish yourself. You can take all the medications. You can minimize stress, follow treatment protocols, and you can still end up in a position where you aren't pregnant or you don't have the outcome that you'd hoped for. I don't say this lightly, but this isn't a space on this podcast where we engage in toxic positivity. Optimism, faith, hope, resilience are crucial ingredients on this path. And you haven't done anything wrong. You haven't done anything to deserve this outcome. And I know a lot of women and couples will resort to blaming themselves when things don't work out. And time and again, I've heard stories where people have done the best they could, everything in their control, and it still hasn't worked out, and they may not yet be pregnant. And I think that's an important thing to name in this space and on podcasts like these, because we have to really meet that part of us head on that tends to blame, that tends to fear, that tends to question what we did to get ourselves in this pickle or predicament. And sometimes there are no answers. You may go to a professional and ask them for guidance, ask them for an understanding of why something happened the way it did. And they don't know. There are limits to what professionals can give you in terms of guidance or explanations for why things unfold the way they do on your path. And that's where I feel faith and trust really come in. This is a spiritual initiation in many ways, being on an IVF and IUI journey. You encounter some of the darkest moments of your life. You encounter any parts of you, those wounded parts that you feel you've worked on, or maybe you haven't, but they come back and they surge to the surface. And you're having to do this personal growth work and self-development work and hold the fort at home or at work, or do the things that you have been doing all this time, and prepare your body for another treatment cycle. And if you are partnered, work with your partner and try to support each other and create this foundation for ongoing attempts. That's a lot on anyone. A lot on anyone's plate. And I just think that if you get through an IVF or IUI journey, you are forever transformed. Your soul has learned lessons that you will use in the rest of this lifetime and in future lifetimes. And it's just something I can't stress enough, is that you may have no idea what you're getting into, and the woman you are at the end of this is not the woman who started out on this journey. And you'll start to embrace the unknown and the mystery and walking in faith in a totally different way. And so it is important, I think, for us to remember we can do everything right and still not yet be mums. And however painful that is, it is unfortunately a truth for some women on this journey or on this path. And then the very last thing, the fifth thing I wish people knew on this IVF IUI journey is how magnificent you are. You are strong, resilient, powerful. You are a feed of nature. So I think a lot of women take that for granted. They just keep pushing through from cycle to cycle. They don't even have the time to process or integrate what happened to their bodies, or emotionally or spiritually. They just want to keep going on this timeline so that they can become mothers. But the reality is you are miraculous. The grit, the determination, the perseverance, how your heart breaks open and expands with each attempt. There are no words for it. It is remarkable. And this is something I wish people knew on their journey, is the amount of heart and tenacity and strength and resilience you hold. Even on days it feels like nothing is going right and you're falling apart and you feel completely crazy for continuing this journey, you are miraculous. You are divine. And I just want to bring that to your attention. And I would love for you to hold on to that after today's episode and come back to these words as often as you need. You've got this. You are incredible to be on this journey and to keep walking this journey. So those are the 5 things I wish people knew about the IVF IUI journey. To summarize, the first is that IVF or IUI is not just medical. It's cognitive, emotional, spiritual, physical, and it affects your nervous system, as many women and partners can attest to. It affects your relationships. It affects your finances. And these are conversations that you won't have in a fertility clinic, but you can have in a community or in a space with others who get it. The second thing I wish people would know about the IVF IUI journey is that it takes time. There's no predictable deadline or timeline for this journey. There may be unexpected breaks, detours, pivots, or you may decide to take a break at times, a much needed break for your mental health or for your peace and your quality of life. And it's okay if you need to take those breaks, and it's okay if this doesn't unfold on the timeline you initially envisioned. Third thing, there is a financial impact, and this can often be a significant part of the stress that some people feel on this journey, but acknowledging this isn't easy and preparing yourself financially for the resources or the provisions to embark on this journey and sustain it those are valid efforts and considerations that you make along the way and at the start of this journey. The fourth thing I wish people knew is that you can do everything right and you may still not get pregnant in the way you'd hoped. And that's okay. That's to be worked with, to be felt, not to be shut down or pretended away or, whatever you tend to do when you're working with yourself and you're facing a really hard moment or a hard reality. It's part of the journey, and you might be surprised even if it doesn't unfold the way you thought. And even if you are going through moments where you've done everything right and it doesn't work the way you'd hoped and you're not pregnant yet, you never know what the future will bring you. And I just invite you to hold both those realities, maybe the grief or frustration or disappointment of things not happening in spite of your best efforts, and the hope that it can happen in the future. And the fifth or last thing I wish you knew about the IVF IUI journey is that you are an amazing human being. You are choosing to bring life onto this earth. You are walking a path very few understand. It has ups and downs. It's incredibly hard. It asks so much of you, and you keep going. So you are a miracle in itself, in yourself. And this is something I hope you hold on to on the hard days, on the wobbly or dark days. And I hope you celebrate when you are a mom and you're sharing your story and your child's birth story with them. You get to share all these parts too. And never forget that you're carrying a lot of inner strength to be on this path. I hope this episode gave you some perspective on the complexity of an IVF IUI journey, the facets that you'll experience or hear about for those you love or other women you know, couples you know on this path. And you might have other things you wish people knew about an IVF IUI journey, and I'd love to connect and hear about them. Feel free to connect with me on Instagram at Shreyasi_Broadhecker or at my website. And I hope this generates some interesting discussions. You might have some big feelings. You might have some realizations after this episode. And I hope that all of it can be held and witnessed, and that you feel a little more seen and supported after listening to this episode. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for taking the time to join me today on the podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please like, share, and leave a review. You can also connect with me at my website, www.Shreyasibroadhecker.com, or at Instagram at Shreyasi_Broadhecker to stay in touch and explore more of the work I do. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode. Disclaimer. The content shared on this podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes and is not a substitute for medical or psychological advice. Every fertility journey is unique, so I encourage you to connect with your healthcare provider or qualified professional for support that's right for you. Any views or opinions shared by guests are their own.